When you hear the word fairy, what immediately pops into your mind?
Hmm.
Tiny wings, glittery dust, maybe Tinkerbell, or perhaps a fairy godmother.
Right. Probably something lighthearted, whimsical,
Hmm,
maybe a bit sparkly.
exactly. That's the image most of us have.
And, that's largely thanks to more recent stuff, literature, art, movies from the last couple of centuries.
But that's not the whole story, is it?
Not even close. If you dig back into the older folklore, the original nature of fairies was often, well, far from sweet. They were complex, powerful, and honestly, often pretty fearsome.
Okay, fearsome. That's intriguing. So, our mission today on the deep dive is to sort of pull back that glittery curtain, unpack the world of fairies.
Yeah, explore their true nature from those ancient, sometimes really dark origins, all the way up to how we see them now.
This deep dive is basically your shortcut to understanding these mythological beings who are definitely more than just childhood sprites.
And we've pulled from all sorts of places for this academic papers, historical texts, looking at like Celtic, Germanic, even Greco-Roman beliefs, but also cultural blogs, online forums, talking about modern sightings, ongoing debates. It's a really wide lens.
It sounds like it covers a lot of ground. So let's start at the beginning. Way back, you mentioned fearsome. What made them so scary? Was it just raw power?
Well, yeah, power was a big part of it. These early figures, they weren't tiny and cute. They were seen as major supernatural entities,
Entities.
and people genuinely feared them as kidnappers, tricksters, sometimes even bringers of death. Their power felt elemental, tied to the land, to death itself, and honestly, to human fear.
So calling them fairies wasn't even the original thing.
No, fairy is a much later, broader label. It lumps together lots of different folk beliefs. Back then, people often wouldn't even name them directly.
Why not?
It was dangerous, risky. You'd call them things like the good people or the fair folk instead.
As a sign of respect. Or
More like caution, appeasement almost. You didn't want to attract the wrong kind of attention by speaking too bluntly about them.
that makes sense. And this idea comes through really strongly in Irish mythology, right? With the Eos.
Exactly. The AOC or the Sidi, sometimes described as like gods in exile.
Gods.
Yeah, the Tuatha De Danann. Legend says they lost a big mythic war and had to retreat
Retreat where?
underground
Yeah.
into sacred hills, burial mounds, what they call cairns. This created this idea of an other world.
Another world, like a parallel dimension.
Sort of, yeah. Existing right alongside ours, hidden. A constant reminder of these ancient powers just beneath the surface.
Wow. And this wasn't just an Irish thing.
Oh, no, not at all. You see similar ideas all over Europe. Norway had the hidden folk.
Hidden folk.
Iceland has its elves.
Yeah.
Denmark had the Pusslinger, the small ones. Sweden had the Vitra or Vetar.
So many different names.
It shows how universal this need was, to personify the forces of nature, fate, the things you couldn't control, good or bad.
And fairy just became the umbrella term for all of them.
Pretty much. Elves, dwarves, goblins, trolls, banshees, even things like nymphs, dryads, kelpies, nixies, sprites, brownies, pixies.
Okay, quite a list.
And some were definitely not friendly, like redcaps, who were said to dye their hats in human blood.
Right. Definitely not Tinkerbell. So, how did we get from that to the sparkly image? When did things start to change?
The big shift really picked up steam in the 19th and 20th centuries. Literature and art had a huge impact.
Like Shakespeare.
Absolutely. A Midsummer Night's Dream was massive for popularizing the idea of tiny winged fairies. Oberon, Titania, Puck. They cemented that imagery for a lot of people.
I can see that. And then you had writers like the brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen.
Right. And they often took those older, darker folk tales and,
Right.
well, clean them up a bit, sanitize them for a broader, maybe younger audience.
Made them less terrifying, more like fairy tales as we know them now.
Exactly. So when you picture Tinkerbell, that specific archetype, the mischievous but ultimately kind, sparkly fairy, that's a relatively modern creation, a product of that transformation.
But it hasn't stopped there, right? Modern fantasy writers are doing new things.
Definitely. Authors like Holly Black, Sarah J. Maas, Julie Kagawa, they're moving beyond the simple caricature.
How so?
They're creating really complex fairy characters, flawed beings living in intricate worlds. They're blending the old lore, sometimes the darker stuff, with modern storytelling. It's a real renaissance in a way.
So it sounds like their nature isn't just black and white, good versus evil.
Not at all. That's a really key point. They often operate on principles that aren't quite human morality. It's more about balance, consequences, Yeah. Their own rules.
And Scottish folklore has a way of categorizing this, doesn't it? The Seelie and Unseelie
I
court.
think it does, yeah. It's a useful framework, though maybe a bit simplified. You got the Sealy court, generally seen as more benevolent, maybe even helpful sometimes.
Okay, the good guys.
Sort of. They might return kindness, help humans out, but they can also be really mischievous. And they definitely didn't like being insulted. They'd seek revenge for that. You'd typically encounter them around twilight, sometimes called the Shining Throne or the Golden Ones.
Okay, so not entirely safe then.
Nope. And then you have the Unseelie court,
The bad guys.
much more overtly malevolent, yeah. Prone to causing harm, misfortune, even death. They were associated with darkness, nighttime raids. Think red caps, slaw, really nasty stuff.
But the key thing is, both could be dangerous.
Absolutely. Offend either court, Seelie or Unseelie, and you could be in trouble. It wasn't about good versus evil like in human terms. It was about respecting their power and their rules.
Which connects to another major aspect, their link to nature.
A huge connection. They're often seen as guardians, almost,
Oh.
overseeing forests, rivers, crops, animals. It's like
Yeah.
unseen forces managing the health of the environment.
The original eco-warriors, maybe?
You could say that. There's a great analogy in one source about wood sprites. Their nature depends entirely on the forest's health. If the forest is thriving, they're benevolent, happy.
But if it's not?
If it's suffering, maybe due to human neglect, deforestation, their nature sours. They become harmful, reflecting the damage done.
Because they're like enforcers of ecological balance.
Exactly. That's why you get stories of mischievous types like Glimmerkin, just tying knots or hiding tools. Maybe a gentle warning.
And then the nastier ones.
Then you get the Gremlings, causing blights on crops, spooking livestock, leading travelers astray. It's like the consequences of disrespecting nature made manifest.
It's a powerful idea, human actions directly influencing the nature of these beings.
It really is.
Okay, so we know they're deeply tied to nature. They have these courts, this dual nature. But what can they actually do? What are their powers?
Oh, their magical toolkit's pretty impressive. Flight, invisibility, shape-shifting are common ones.
Shape-shifting into what?
Animals, often. Deer, horses, sometimes even taking on human form to blend in.
Okay.
They can control aspects of nature, cast powerful enchantments, create illusions.
Illusions? Like what?
Fairy glamour is a big one. Making something dangerous look beautiful, or making worthless things look valuable, like fairy gold that turns into leaves or dust later.
Cricky.
Very. Some could detect lies, travel instantly between places. Some had healing abilities, though that wasn't universal. And they could famously lure people away with enchanting music.
Right, leading people astray. And there's that weird story about the ointment.
Ah, yes, the fairy ointment. The idea was if a human put it on their eyes, they could see the fairy world as it truly is, see through the glamour.
But there was a catch.
Usually, yeah. It often led to blindness or some other punishment, like seeing the truth was forbidden, too dangerous for mortals.
So definitely powerful, but also dangerous. What kind of specific threats did they pose to people in these stories?
All sorts, causing sudden illnesses or even madness, being fairy-struck.
Be fairy struck.
Yeah, or being fairy-led where you get lost, sometimes for days or years, maybe come back changed, or not at all.
That sounds terrifying.
It was meant to be. They could also spoil food, ruin crops, make cows stop giving milk, sour the cream, messing with daily life and survival.
So how did people protect themselves if you couldn't even talk about them directly?
There were traditional defenses. Cold iron was a big one.
Iron. Why iron?
Folklore often says fairies dislike it, can't stand the touch of it, so people carried iron knives or hung horseshoes.
Interesting. What else?
Charms made from certain plants, like rowan wood or specific herbs. Holy water was sometimes used, and of course avoiding places they were known to frequent.
Like those fairy rings. Or hawthorn trees.
Exactly. Especially ancient hawthorn trees, often seen as sacred to them, or portals. And the number one rule was always, don't disrespect them. Speaking ill of them was just asking for trouble.
This fear seems really potent, especially when you get to the changeling myth. That feels like peak fairy fear.
It really is. It's one of the most disturbing and, frankly, revealing aspects of fairy lore. It tells us so much about human anxieties back then.
So remind us, the basic idea is they steal a human baby.
Right. Fairies, or sometimes other beings like trolls or elves, would secretly swap their own offspring, often sickly or deformed, for a healthy human infant.
But why? What was the motivation supposed to be?
The stories give lots of reasons. Maybe trolls thought of human upbringing was better for their kid, or fairies wanted human beauty or vitality for their own kind.
Okay.
Sometimes the stolen human child was said to become a servant in the fairy world, Or maybe they swapped an old dying fairy into a human cradle to be cared for.
An old fairy disguised as a baby. Creepy.
Definitely. And some darker versions suggest fairies needed human life force, maybe because their own magic or world was fading.
And the changeling itself, the fairy baby left behind, what was it like?
The descriptions are chilling. Often sickly, strange-looking, cried constantly, maybe had an unsettling, unnatural intelligence or wisdom. Sometimes they aged way too fast or not at all.
It's easy to see how terrifying that would be for parents.
Absolutely. And while it's disturbing folklore, you have to remember this was a pre-medical world.
So the myth was an explanation.
Exactly. For things they couldn't understand. Developmental disabilities, chronic illnesses in babies, high infant mortality rates. It offered a supernatural explanation instead of, say, a medical one or blaming the parents.
But it had real-world consequences, didn't it?
Tragically, yes. Children who were different, sickly, or difficult suspected changelings were sometimes horribly mistreated, neglected, or abandoned.
And you mentioned a specific case.
Bridget Cleary. In Ireland, 1895, not the Dark Ages, the late 19th century. Her own husband and family became convinced she wasn't herself, that she had been replaced by a changeling.
And what happened?
They ended up burning her alive, trying to drive the supposed fairy out. It's a horrific example of how potent these beliefs could be.
God, that's awful. It shows how these myths weren't just stories.
No, they had real power. The changeling myth, in a way, shifted blame for genetic conditions people couldn't explain. Some researchers even point to conditions like PKU, phenylketonuria. It can cause symptoms like lighter skin, hair, eyes, vomiting, seizures, hyperactivity, things that might match the description of a strange child. And fire was often mentioned as a test to see if a child was a changeling.
Which links back tragically to the Cleary case. Wow, okay, that's incredibly dark.
It is. It shows the depth of fear these beings could inspire.
Let's pivot from that darkness for a moment, because folklore evolves and sometimes fear becomes something else. Let's talk about a modern fairy who actually brings comfort. The tooth fairy.
Right, a much lighter figure, thankfully.
Yeah.
And the tooth fairy we know today, she's actually quite a recent invention, especially compared to Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny.
Really? But the idea of doing something with lost teeth is old, isn't it?
Oh, ancient, millennia old. There were Norse and European traditions about burying baby teeth, maybe to protect the child in the afterlife. There was even something called a tan fee.
And fake?
Yeah, a tooth fee, a gift given for a child's first lost tooth. And apparently Vikings used kids' teeth as good luck charms in battle.
No way. Okay, that's kind of metal. What about other places?
It's fascinating globally. In many countries, Russia, Spain, parts of Asia, the tooth deity isn't a fairy, it's a mouse.
A mouse. Why a mouse?
It's thought to be sympathetic magic. Rodents' teeth grow continuously, so the idea is the child's adult teeth will grow and strong like a mouse's.
It makes sense.
France has La Petite Souris, the little mouse, going back to the 17th century. Latin countries have Ratoncito Perez, who's a huge pop culture figure now, even has his own museum.
A mouse with a museum? That's
Yeah.
brilliant. So leaving teeth under pillows wasn't the only thing.
Not by a long shot. People used to throw lost teeth towards the sun or into a fire or backwards between their legs.
Backwards between their legs. Okay.
Or onto the roof, into a mouse hole, bury them, hide them from animals, even put them in a tree or swallow them. Lots of variations.
So the tooth fairy today, she's kind of a consolidation of all that.
In a way, yeah. And unlike Santa, her image isn't really standardized. She can look like anything old, young, sprite-like, human-like.
And she's pretty big in pop culture now.
Huge. Books, cartoons, movies like Rise of the Guardians or Toothless. She's everywhere.
But her main job is basically...
Comfort, really. Making losing a tooth less scary, maybe even exciting for a kid, turning a potentially traumatic little event into something positive.
Dentists have even co-opted her.
They have, encouraging kids to keep teeth clean because, the tooth fairy supposedly pays more for cleaner teeth.
Oh, smart. Is there an average rate these days?
Well, a Visa survey back in 2015 found the average U.S. kid got about $3.70 per tooth.
$3.70, not bad. Okay, so from terrifying changelings to benevolent tooth collectors, but belief in the older kinds of fairies, the ones tied to nature, that hasn't totally vanished, has it?
Not entirely, no. You still hear accounts. There were documented sightings even in the 20th century. A farmer's wife in Somerset in '62 claimed a little man in grain helped her when she was lost.
And the really famous one, the Cottingley fairies.
Right. Those photos taken by two young cousins in the early 1900s caused a huge stir. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, defended them as real.
Wow. Doyle believed.
He did, though the photos were later admitted to be fakes, mostly cardboard cutouts. But it shows how much people wanted to believe.
And it continues even more recently. You mentioned something in Sweden.
Yeah, a really interesting case from 2015. There was a spot on a road with a lot of accidents,
Okay.
and some local residents started saying it was because the road had been built over the dwelling place of, well, supernatural beings, angered spirits or fairies or whatever you want to call them.
Seriously. And people debated
Oh,
this.
yeah. Big online debates erupted between people who believe this explanation and those who dismissed it.
That perfectly captures that tension you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The enchantment versus disenchantment idea. The pull towards finding meaning, connection, maybe spiritual explanations, often tied to nature,
Yeah.
versus the drive for purely rational scientific answers.
And modern fairy belief kind of lives in that messy middle ground.
I think so. It's a blend of the old folklore, definitely influenced by pop culture, and sometimes mixed with new age spirituality or ecological concerns.
And some people report more direct interactions, like being saved by fairies.
Yeah, there are anecdotes like that.
Yeah.
People claiming fairies guided them when lost in the wilderness, or intervened in a medical crisis, or prevented a house fire. Even helped start a car that wouldn't run.
Really? Starting a car?
That's what the story claims. Often these experiences are linked back to some kind of etiquette, like maybe the person had shown respect, or maybe they'd ignored a warning and got into trouble and then were helped. It suggests that reciprocal relationship again.
And this connects back to the idea of them as nature guardians.
It seems to. One source, a medium, described them as wardens, vessels of Mother Nature, living in a parallel dimension.
A parallel dimension.
Yeah, and she felt this dimension was sort of drifting away from ours because of human pollution, greed, disrespect for the planet.
That's a powerful image. Did she have experiences herself?
She mentioned being saved on a dangerous road in Sweden, she believed, by fairies. And another time, seeing a transparent being that communicated our world is drifting away.
Wow, heavy stuff. So if someone listening is feeling a bit more enchanted and maybe wants to, I don't know, respectfully look for this connection, what does folklore suggest?
Well, the traditional advice always starts with respect and humility. Don't go crashing and demanding things.
Right. Location matters.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Ancient, undisturbed, natural places are key. Old-growth forests, hidden valleys or glens, remote caves, and of course, fairy rings, those mushroom circles.
Okay. Any other spots?
Sacred springs, lakes, streams, places with water often feature. And ancient sites like old mounds or burial grounds, tying back to that AOC connection.
And maybe leave a little something.
Offerings are traditional: milk, honey, bread, maybe something shiny like a coin or button, a small token of goodwill.
And timing. Is there a best time to try?
The liminal times are always mentioned. Dawn and dusk, the times in between day and night, and the big turning points of the year. Solstices, equinoxes, times when the veil between worlds is supposedly thin.
So it's quite a journey we've taken from these really powerful, feared ancient beings who could curse you or steal your child.
Right, all the way to tiny winged sprites trading cash for teeth.
It shows how incredibly varied and adaptable these myths are. Fairies, in all their forms, really tap into something deep in us, don't they? Our fascination with the unseen, the magical.
And our connection, or sometimes disconnection, with the natural world. They reflect our respect for it, or lack thereof, and the potential consequences.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. What does it really mean to respect the mysteries of the world around us?
Yeah, and think about the stories you tell yourself about things you can't quite explain. Is that line between what we call fact and what we call folklore always as sharp as we like to think?
Something to ponder.